Rohl right here, the Egyptologist, controversial Egyptologist. I got you. The question I want to ask him is in regards to anthropology, looking at migration patterns for the ethnogenesis of ancient Israelites. And the question that I posed to David Rohl was in regards to the Timna Valley mining and the congregations that were there in that region, and to identify the populace of the people there and how a local deity that was worshipped by the people in that area made its way into the Levant region, as we know as modern-day Palestine. So the question that I pose to you, is that when we look at the Timna Valley, Serapit, which is another excavation site for mining and turquoise, we know that these places were occupied by the Egyptians. Time period, you say, was late Bronze period, would you say?
Yes, late Bronze, that's when the mining operation stops.
All right, the mining operation, and that's because Egypt started to lose its control in the Levant region and absorbed or scaled back.
Correct.
All right, now during that period of time, what I was asking David Rohl is the locals that lived around the Timna Valley area were Midianites, and I was asking them if that was the case. Were they Midianites?
I would define them as Kenites, which is
gotcha.
a subgroup
Of the Midianites. There you go.
They are the smelters, the copper workers, who especially have a special designation of Kenites.
Gotcha.
They belong to the greater Midianite tribal group.
Yes.
They are a specific trade with the Kenites.
Now here's a question. Do we have anything in Egyptian records that identifies the ethnicity of these people? The Midianites?
No, they are not mentioned at all in Egyptian texts. They would be referred to the general term as Shasu or Shasu, which means desert folk.
Yes.
People who are nomadic.
Yes.
We would say today Bedouin.
Bedouin, right?
Okay, so it's the equivalent of the Bedouin in the ancient world.
Gotcha.
So we're having these groups where there were the Moabites or Midianites or Edomites, they would be classed as Shasu in the general sense.
Now, Shasu is not an endearing term, correct?
No, no. They're like sand dwellers.
Sand dwellers, right?
It's a pejorative.
Exactly.
Okay, the Egyptians will look down on these people.
Yeah.
Down their nose down. So, and they're always trouble.
Yes.
You know, they're not a state organization, therefore they're going to be trouble.
Yes, they was always on the fringe, and every time the Egyptians went into the land, they would make an example of them and bring them back as servants, as slaves, and we would see them on the war reliefs being tied up and subdued by the Egyptians. So the question I have is that, in looking at biblical archaeology and some elements from Egyptian archaeology, we have at the Celeb Temple in Nubia a relief there that mentions the Shasu of Yahweh. Now, when I was looking at the hieroglyphs, I was making out the Y, the H, and the W. W at the end being the chick, indicating a U sound, which would be plural. Am I correct?
That is correct, but also it could be a vowel mark. That's what happens with the wav that you get on the chick is it marks the position of the vowel. We can't tell what the vowel would be. It could be a U, Shasu, it could be a Shasa, it could be another vowel like that. But it would most likely be, in this case, it would be the plural symbol, which would be Shasu.
Gotcha. And now, Shasu and Yahweh, or the Yod, Hey, Wav, we were saying in Hebrew, and in the hieroglyphics, when we actually determine it, it's a cognate, or this correlates to the Hebrew Yod, Hey, Wav. Now, the reason why I'm asking is that when we're looking at that particular war relief, that Yod, Hey, Wav, what is that designated as? Is that a providence? Is that a people? Is that a deity? How do you render it in Egyptology?
It's been debated. There are two opinions. Either it's a region or it's a deity. And it's quite unusual to have a group like the Shasu be named after a deity or for a deity. So it is unusual. So there is a debate with amongst our cultures about this terminology. In my particular case, because this name Yahweh is used on several groups of people, not just the Shasu.
Oh yeah.
Then it sounds much more like it's a deity than it would be a region.
And we would know that there were times where you had different ethnic groups that would come together and worship to a particular deity as well, or clans of pastoralists or even semi-nomads that would aggregate together to worship a particular deity. So the question is, if we look at the historical record, because we just deal with the Bible as the historical evidence, we're not dealing with the theology part or anything like that. Historically speaking, when Moses left out of Egypt, he wound up in the region of Midian. He was there, according to the story, for 40 years. He was under a high priest by the name of Jephthah. Correct. He married the high priest's daughter, which would initiate him into the priesthood, so to say. Just like Joseph married Asenathah, and the priest of On, or Anu, he married into the priesthood. The question would be, when Moses encountered his deity, it was in the region of Midian. We deciphered that the region of Midian is by northwest Arabia. Is that correct? Bordering the Sinai Peninsula.
That's correct. So to the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So
that's the heartland.
The heartland. Gotcha.
The Midianites roamed very wide.
Gotcha.
So that's the heartland of Midian. But Midian itself could have been much, much further.
Gotcha. Now the reason why I'm bringing that up is because when we look at the Midianites that were there, when Moses went into this land, he was first encountered, or he was first approached by this deity, who we call Yahuwah, Yahweh.
Yeah.
In this region.
Yes.
Then he goes and, he leaves out of this region after his 80 years, 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian. He goes back to Egypt. He brings a bunch of Bedouins, Shasu, whatever you want to call these Semites with them. When they leave out, they bump back into this region, and from this region they make their way north. Actually north, east, and then northwest when they cross over the Jordan, and they start to settle this land.
Yeah.
Now, before there's a permanent settlement, there's the people are mingling in with the other natives and taking up their so-called deities. But then when we get to about the 9th century, looking at the evidence, for example, the Moabite Stela, we see that the Israelites are being associated with a particular deity with the same cognates of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Now, the interesting about that is that if we look at the Ugaritic records, the Ebla tablets, anything from the Syrian-Palestinian region, we don't see this designation for this particular deity associated with these individuals. Now, the interesting thing, and this is the question I wanted to know from your perspective, how do you account for the migration of a particular local deity finally finding its way into the land of Palestine and Israel, emerging synonymously with these people called the ancient Israelites, and the ancient Israelites being associated with this local deity back in Midian? How do you account for that migration? Because in this last one, because Israel 15 says that the Israelites emerged out of the Canaanites, but we have no record of the evolution of this particular deity coming into the chance of the emergence of these people.
You did right, and you answer your own question. Because the reality of this is in the conventional timeline.
Yes, sir. There you go.
So at the end of the late Bronze Age, when the Timna temple is abandoned, the worship of Hathor is abandoned, the mines cease to operate, we're looking at a time in this revised dating system when the Shasu of Yahweh and Yahweh are already well established within the region. And the answer to your question is the way that Yahweh moves into Canaan is with the Israelites and with Moses.
Yes.
That's the mechanism which drives Yahwehism.
Yes. And this is strictly anthropology. We're not talking about the theological layer of the text. It's strictly a migration pattern of the ethnogenesis of people in a particular region and making their way into another region. Based on a political climate, now they emerge as a nation state of people and they start to make themselves distinct. We start to see so-called Israelite pottery in the north, Israelite pottery in the south. We have the collared rim, the burgundy brandishing with the stripes around the pottery, and we find that in Iron Age 1 and then Iron Age 2 strata of layer. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because when we look at ancient Egypt, and we know how big and how vast ancient Egypt is, a lot of the excavational digs that we found in the Levant region is being said to happen in ages where there was little or no civilization, or little to no, for example, late Bronze Age. There was little to no civilization or people in certain cities that the Bible claims to have conquered.
There were no cities.
Oh, no cities. There you go.
There were tented peoples because we have cemeteries.
And we also have the Amarna tablets.
We have the Amarna tablets.
The Amarna tablets tell you a lot of activity going on during this region, right? Now, when people say, looking at the Meneptah study, some people say that Flinders Petrie mistranslated the word Israel there. What is your take on it?
He didn't. There's no doubt about that. Just remember, in this context now that we've got this is not Israel of Moses. This is not Israel of Joshua. It's much later in time. It's the time of Solomon or even later still. So we don't have an issue there. That mention of Israel can be a nation, can be an entity, a political entity in the region. The reason why we've got this confusion here is because of the conventional dating system. Okay, so the mechanism for Yahwehism to evolve through the system you observe is through the experience of Moses. It's not that Jethro is the high priest of Yahweh. It's Moses discovers the name Yahweh, discovers the name of God, okay, and and it thronged out, everything else evolves.
Exactly.
And that can only happen if Moses comes before the Shasu of Yahweh and all these other descriptions. If Moses comes afterwards as an impression of it, then Yahweh is before Moses.
Exactly.
And that is not in the Bible.
Exactly. Now here's the thing. When we look at pre-dynastic Egypt, this Egyptology is your field. Pre-dynastic Egypt. Looking at pre-dynastic Egypt, we have Semites that are coming from the Levant region, settling in Lower Egypt, which is towards the north, for the audience out there. Sometimes we get the orientation mixed up. Settling in the north in the Neolithic period, before we have any administrative writing or anything of that nature. An acculturation process took place, and now nation state had to be established, and those from Upper Egypt, I guess, exerted their wills over those who were in Lower Egypt. Will you be able to say with affinity that the residents, mostly, because it was mostly a melting pot in the Nile Delta, would you say that when Narmer, Menes, whoever you want to designate him, unified on the Narmer Stela, the individual that he is holding is more than likely a Semite or a Asiatic? And I say that because I want to establish the fact that there was a melting pot of Semites, even some Libyans, that were living in the Nile Delta region. So if we examine the Narmer palette, would you say the person that Narmer is holding is an enemy? We know he's an enemy, but is he an Asiatic? Can we consider
He's wearing a beard.
Yes.
He's got long, so it's difficult to say if he comes from the Western Delta or the Eastern Delta or from the Levant. But I would take issue with you on one point.
Sure.
And that is that you have this, as you say, this alteration between the Semites and the Delta folk in the north. For in Upper Egypt and in the south, we have a new element comes in. And it doesn't come in, it's not all coming in from the Sahara or from the Sudan. It's also coming in across the desert from the east. Okay, because we have clear evidence of this. We have something called Mesopotamian influence. And that comes from southern Mesopotamia, around the Arabian Gulf, into the Red Sea, and across the desert.
Wow.
So we have the Jebel Arachne, for instance.
Yes.
Where we have this Asiatic figure with two lions, controlling two lions. That's clearly a Mesopotamian.
Yes.
And it's not native Egyptian. So there's a third layer to consider. There is the African indigenous Nilotic peoples of the south. That introduced the cult of Hathor,
yes.
the cow goddess, the desert figures, all these things, the astronomers, the guys who sat and watched the sky and brought all that knowledge. We have the Semites coming in from the Levant, occupying the Delta and mixing with those people. And we have the third element coming from Mesopotamia, who are the sons of Noah.
Wow.
The descendants of Noah are coming around by ship, by reed ship. Okay? I've done a lot of survey work in the desert. We found thousands of carvings of high-powered ships in the desert of people dragging them across the desert. We've seen ropes, people dragging the boats from the Red Sea to the Nile. And that is the story that we have of the dispersion of the nations.
Exactly.
Okay, so Mizraim and the tribe have come to Egypt.
Yes.
You've got Cush coming to the Sudan. You've got Put going up to the Northwest Delta. And you've got Canaan going up to Phoenicia.
Now, a lot is unknown about the ancient Libyans. Am I correct here? A lot of the information we have on them is based on some Egyptian records, and also looking at the ethnogenesis of the Berber tribes. The question would be, from the West Delta, were Libyans migrating into the West Delta and settling there? And the reason why I bring this up, because your specialty is a third intermediate period. During that period of time, we have the Meshbets, I think that's what they call, who makes their way from Libya, and these immigrants are making their way into Egypt. After the 20th dynasty, starts in the 21st dynasty.
Some of them are military captive. They've been caught in battle.
Gotcha.
And brought and then used as mercenaries. Okay. And as we develop,
because the Egyptians never had a standing army. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you get these guys who are coming in, who have been previously enemies and now fighting for them. And they rise to power. The generals rise to power. And so we get the 22nd dynasty, which comes out of that milieu of those military men who've been captured, who are now heads of the army, who are able to then become kings in their own rights. So that's what the 22nd dynasty is about. So they are not being migrated. They actually become part of the culture of Egypt.
Wow. So now what would account for that dark age or that dark period of time? Would it be because there's a lack of documentation during that time period? Would it be because it was civil turmoil? What would account for that so-called third intermediate period of darkness?
Much bigger than that. Okay. There's a collapse of civilization across the Mediterranean. Okay. So the Trojan War happens at this time. Okay. The Hittite Empire collapses. The Mycenaean Empire collapses, Agamemnon and all those people, they disappear, the Dorians,
And we don't know.
there's a movement of peoples from Europe into the world. There's climate change, which is causing people, a domino effect, people migrating from A to B to C. We have the Philistine invasion, all these things are happening at the very moment that 20th dynasty is collapsing. And we have reports of famine in Egypt. We have strikes, we have documents for the first strikes, when the men go on strike who were building the temples. All these things are going on at this time. And then we have the king Ramses III assassinated in his own state. So there's disruption everywhere. So it's not a lack of documentation, it's a complete collapse in the administrative systems of all the major nations around the world at that time. And it's what creates this dark age we have.
And so if you was looking at the Near East, let's say we're looking in the Mesopotamia area, what is the documentation that we can use to actively depict a more certain chronology during this period of time? Because we can't use Egypt as a status quo for it. Where else will we look in the ancient realm to help to kind of figure out timeline-wise what is going on during this time?
Well, there are two pillars in ancient chronology. There's the Egyptian timeline and there's the Assyrian timeline. Now, the reason
Old Assyrian we're talking about first.
Well, I'm talking about Neo-Assyrian going back to because they have something called a Limu system. And that is that every year a particular individual is chosen to be the council leader of the Great Assyrian Council. And his name is recorded on the year of the king's reign. So we have these documents going back these year by year accounts, so we can construct chronology using this system. Okay? It takes us back to 911 BC. And before that, this thing is fragmented, so it's not actually constructed. So we can use Assyrian chronology back to 911 BC, and that's why we can date the biblical kings of the divided monarchy, because they are associated either as giving tribute to the Assyrian kings or fighting the Assyrian. So we have these things that can lock together the biblical kings and the Assyrian kings. We can't go before 911 BC.
Gotcha. All right. So why do you think it is that Egyptologists cherry pick from biblical history and timeline, cherry pick from Near Eastern timeline to fill in the blanks for Egypt, as opposed to just using everything administratively that has been established in Egypt to date the timeline?
Because Egyptology was born out of the Bible.
Can you say that one more time?
Egyptology was born out of the Bible. When the first Egyptologists went to Egypt, they had a Bible in this hand and they had a trowel in that hand. Okay. And they were digging for evidence for this book. That's what they were doing. So when Champollion found that name, when he was looking for Shishak, when he found that name Shosha, that was the key to the big mistake when the whole thing started. And so they used the Bible to actually date Egyptian history at the beginning of the 32nd dynasty, the 22nd dynasty. Right? And then they worked backwards in time to the time of Ramesses.
Yes.
Okay, and they know about Ramesses being one of the cities that was built by the Israelites. And so they have a system of dating that's based on the biblical text of the synchronism between Shishak and Rehoboam, year 5 of Rehoboam, 5 years after the death of Solomon. And they use that to date Egyptian history. Okay? Then when they look at the time of Ramesses, they find no evidence for the Israelites. They find no evidence of the conquest 40 years later. And so they dismiss the Bible as fiction. So they use it to start off with to fix Egyptian dating. And they use Egyptian dating to blow the Bible right out the window.
That's incredible, because they don't even look at it as a literature of a culture. I think because the connotation in the mind is that people look at the text and they take it myth seriously. Sometimes they look at it as a mythical book or just something that was written by these cultural people, as opposed to just looking at it as the development of the literature of a particular class or ethnicity of people. The last thing that I want to say, because I don't want to hold you up, because I know a lot of people want to say something. When people say that there's no such thing as the ancient Israelites, according to Egyptian recommendation, how would you respond to that?
There is clear evidence on 2 occasions that we have monumental inscriptions within the Israel. So nobody can argue with that. The question is, how do we interpret that text? Okay, and history is about interpretation. What happened in the past is the past. That's what happened. We don't know what happened.
Exactly. We wasn't there.
We are going to try and work out what's happened. That's what a historian's job is to try and work out what happened. Okay, and we use the evidence from archaeology and the evidence from ancient texts to construct construct a history. And if that history doesn't answer the questions, it's a poor history. If a history manages to answer most of the questions, it's a great history. And that's what we're striving to do constantly, is to try and answer as many questions as possible. Now, my history has got questions that I've not been able to answer. If we're honest, no historian could ever get 100% of the answers. Okay. So it's our job to do that, is to try and get the best result we can. Okay, and then put it out to the people, and if it's believable, it'll be accepted. If it's not believable, it'll be rejected.
Do you think it's a conspiracy?
No, I think it's simply a case that if you walk into a scholar's, an archaeologist's office or his library, you see a row of books on this side, a set of belt shelves with archaeological reports. Those are the facts. On the other side of the library, you have the historical interpretation, history books. Those change with every generation. They become, if you read a 19th century history book of the ancient world, it's totally different to a book that's written today, and will be totally different again to a book that's written 100 years from now. But the archaeological facts will always be the same. So it's our interpretation of those facts that's crucial. And the same thing applies to the Bible. It's our interpretation of that text which matters. And I think we're getting closer and closer to the reality of that text.
And for the people at home, can you just let them know the fixed chronology, according to what you teach, has Joseph coming into 1664 BCE?
The biblical dates. They're not changing the biblical dates.
Gotcha.
What happens is Joseph is now moved into a different dynasty, into a different era. He now belongs to the end of the 12th dynasty. The sojourn in Egypt is now the 13th dynasty. The exodus from Egypt is at the end of the 13th dynasty, when the last king disappears. We don't have a grave for him or anything. Maybe he did drown in the just don't know. And then Egypt is invaded by the Hyksos. For 200 years, Egypt is under the thumb of the Hyksos. That is the punishment, if you like, that we hear about in the biblical text of Egypt. And then from on out, we've got the conquest of the place, because we now have Jericho being destroyed. We have the cities in the Levant being destroyed, which matches the story of Joshua and the conquest. Then we move on to the Judges period, which is now the early New Kingdom in Egypt relative to that. And when we get to the time of Saul, David and Solomon, we're in the Amarna period, the time of Akhenaten. We have texts in the British Museum and the Cairo Museum and the Berlin Museum, letters from King Saul written to Pharaoh. Once you piece the thing together, you see the whole thing working at every step of the way. So Ramesses II is no longer the Pharaoh of the Exodus. He's now the Pharaoh who took golden shields.
Can you let the people know why Egyptologists are afraid of chronology when it comes to the dark ages of Egypt? And you mentioned there's only 50. Is that correct? 50 expert Egyptologists that deal with chronology. Why is that such an area of concern and sensitivity that they tend to avoid?
Right. Well, first of all, Egyptology is a big field.
Yes.
And within that field, there are sub-disciplines. So you have mummy specialists, you have language specialists who read only texts, you have archaeologists, you have people who deal with religion and ritual. Okay, all these are different fields within the overall discipline. And the one specialism that nobody dare touch is the timeline. Okay, because that is written in stone. It's been written in stone for 100 years. So you'll hear archaeologists say, oh, we can only adjust the timeline by 10 years at the most we're looking for. I'm looking at something much more dramatic than several centuries. And that's why they're so scared of it, because that changes everything. The whole paradigm changes. You do that. You have a new paradigm. You have to completely clean your mind of the old chronology side and start again from the foundation. Okay. And that scares me. And when you get to the complexities of an intermediate period, first, second, or third intermediate period, those are the most difficult eras in Egyptian history to work out, because you have a plethora of dynasties all ruling at the same time. You've got to work out the relationship between them. That's a tough area. That's a tough subject. And not many Egyptologists are prepared to go down that road.
Gotcha. And what would you like to say to the dissenters out there from all of the data that you present? There's a lot of people that are looking at David Rohl's work and saying, this is pseudo work. You know, what is this guy talking about? Is he on the fringe of even your Egyptology area as well comes into question now because of the other areas that you're diving into? What do you have to say to the dissenters in regards to your premise, in regards to the theories that you present? What do you have to say say for the dissenters, because for me speaking with you, you're very thorough, and it's helped me to actually go back and research some stuff, and for you to actually hear some of my scholarship, I'm like, wow, I must be on the right path. But what would you say to the dissenters out there that say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about?
I would say something very simple. Open your ears and listen. Because most of the time what I find with the Egyptologists and the scholars is they simply reject the idea on principle, not on evidence. Okay? If somebody presents evidence, you look at it, you analyse it, and you say, is this guy right or is this guy wrong? You don't suddenly start from the premise this guy's wrong. Okay? I've got all the academic credentials, just like them. The difference is I'm presenting a different paradigm to them. Because I see the evidence in a different way. It's not because I'm clever on them, it's just they've not looked at this evidence. They're in their mummies, they're in their language, they're in their architecture, they're in their theology. They're not looking at the same material as me. It's an expert field. Okay. But what it does is it affects every other field in the discipline. It's the skeleton upon which the flesh of history is made. And if you don't build that skeleton correctly, then the flesh is a total mess.
And you're one of the few archaeologists to actually go to Avaris and actually see the Austrian team there actually do that dig. That is recent work that a lot of the rest of the world has not seen peer review or examined yet. So do you think that is also one of the hidden keys that can be utilized to unlock this true chronological situation, is when we go and examine this new excavational work that you had the liberty of going to view at Avaris? And I'll say that and then we can end off on that. So can you touch on the market? That's crucial to everything that happens today, because it affects chronology, it helps to verify claims in the scriptures. What would you say in regards to the site at Avaris and how crucial it is for the other Egyptologists to get on board?
It doesn't only apply to Avaris, it applies to every part of the Middle East. A lot of scholars sitting in university ivory towers working with books and documents and never go to the places, their subject matter that they specialise in. One of my tutors at university when I was doing my undergraduate degree, and he was an Egyptologist, had not been to Egypt for 35 years. And he was teaching the subject to students who had been to Egypt and who hadn't been to Egypt. So I say, go to the places, examine the evidence firsthand, never accept a single fact without checking it yourself. That's what you have to do. So if you want to find out about Avaris, you go there, you talk to the archaeologists, you sit at the dining table, you discuss their work, you go to the archaeological site, you see the evidence, you see the Minoan frescoes coming out of the ground right in front of your eyes, which tell you that a Minoan princess came and married an Egyptian slave. Those are the things you've got to do, and you do the same thing in the Holy Land, you do the same thing in Syria. If you wanted to find the Garden of Eden, go look for it, don't find it in a book.
And with that was powerful. I want to thank you, David Rohl. Excellent interview. This guy is sharp. He's on point. And I look forward to building with him again. Hopefully I impressed him. I don't know.
You did.
He said I did. And I look forward to working with him again. So I thank you for that interview, and I think this is going to clarify for the whole world when they see this. It's going to make a change, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you again, David.
Okay. All right.